Let's talk high strangeness and artificial intelligence. Question: could AI be affecting how we see and experience reality? I want to share with you why I think the possibility that AI may be influencing our perception of time and maybe reality itself may be happening. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexis Brooks. Welcome to the segment of Conscious Commentary, where I'd like to dive into some of the what I'm going to call all out weirdness I and many of you may be experiencing as of late. Is AI to blame? Right now on Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. You may have heard the news recently that the mother of Whitney Houston and well known gospel singer Cissy Houston passed away just this past Monday on October 7th at the age of 91 of Alzheimer's. Of course, I send my condolences and prayers to Cissy's family and much healing. But I want to share with you something that I would consider odd and curious as it relates to the news of Cissy's passing. Now, about a week before the news of her death hit the headlines, I'd seen a very interesting and kind of newly established, I guess you would call it an artistic expression that's been going viral on social media recently. There have been, if I can describe it, these sort of AI generated animated videos of these super real life depictions of African American notable public figures like Martin Luther King and Maya Angelou, even Jimi Hendrix, Tupac, Muhammad Ali, Marvin Gaye, Aaliyah, and Whitney Houston. The list goes on, among others, all who have passed away. And the depictions are actually these beautiful, almost heavenly scenes of each of them in these lovely garden landscapes. They're so lifelike and actually very moving to watch. And because of that, because they're so moving, these posts have actually gone viral. No surprise. Now, I'd seen some of these in previous days. And on this one particular day, I'm going to say about a week or so before Sissy passed away, I'd found one of these AI generated depictions, and it was a scene of Whitney and Sissy embracing. And I immediately thought to myself, oh my gosh, did Sissy pass away? So I quickly did a search, as I typically do, to see if she had passed away, thinking, of course, it would have hit the news feed and come out immediately. Come to find out, no, apparently she was still alive at the time. This was, again, I'm going to estimate around, I don't know, October 1st or 2nd, maybe. Now, fast forward to the date that she is said to have actually passed away, which was October 7th. It dawned on me at that time what I had just seen the previous week. And I immediately thought to myself, how weird that these animated tributes, one of them featured Cissy Houston and Whitney, and yet at the same time, this particular reel had posted she hadn't passed. Not yet. So the question is, what's up with that? What's even weirder is that when I decided to go back to the day I searched for her name, let's say around the 1st or 2nd of October, to check to see if she had passed, I couldn't find it anywhere in my web browsing history. I checked my computer, I checked my phone, nowhere to be found. It mysteriously disappeared. So obviously, you start to question, I did, your own recollection. Did I imagine or even dream that I'd seen this post in my feed before she died? I thought about it. No, I know I didn't imagine it. I know what I saw. So what was going on? What is going on? So I actually managed to find the artist, happy to say, who'd been posting these amazing. Happy to say, not only did I find him, I heard from him, the gentleman that's been posting these amazing, and they're really quite beautiful, these AI generated animated tribute scenes that have gone viral. I wanted to ask him specifically about the Sissy and Whitney scene, and he replied to me. He said, I've never done anything with Whitney and Sissy, just Whitney. So obviously I was even more perplexed. Where did that one come from? And by the way, not only was I unable to find my own web browsing history back on the day that I saw this post and was searching for Sissy to see if she had passed, but I couldn't even relocate the post itself, nowhere to be found. So there were two conspicuously missing things. Again, was this my imagination? And if not, what is going on? You have to ask, was this some version of the Mandela Effect? We're going to go into that in a minute because I think it's worth bringing into this conversation. Well, as I started to ponder what, if anything, weird is going on when it comes to this I'm going to say tighter and tighter interrelationship we're all having to some degree with artificial intelligence, I had to ask the question, could there be either a direct or even indirect influence on how AI is warping our reality, warping time, space, our recollection of events, the very fabric of reality that we've come to know? I'm going to get into some ideas that have been tossed around as to how AI may be playing a pivotal role in not only our perception of reality, but maybe even the foundation of reality itself. But before I do, I want to share a couple more strange incidents that have happened to me over recent years. I'm going to say within about 10 years, let's say. They've all caused me to question this very idea, what we've just brought up here. Now, I know, I'm sure many of you have heard me talk about what I'm going to call the James Gandolfini incident. James Gandolfini. In the past, I've mentioned, and by the way, for those of you who don't or didn't remember that name, he was the actor who played Tony Soprano on the HBO hit series The Sopranos. So Gandolfini died on June 19th, 2013, over 10 years ago. But a few days, maybe even close to a week before his passing was announced, I'd been doing some research online for something totally unrelated. And as I'm kind of quickly browsing through these websites, I happened to notice this headline came flashing across my screen really quick. I can't even recall the name of the website. And the headline read something like actor James Gandolfini dead at, I don't know, I think it was 50 or 51. You can go check and see how old he was when he passed. But the bottom line is the headline just blinked across my screen. And then I quickly moved on because I was doing something different. I hadn't been looking for him per se. But I recall pausing, almost having this like delayed reaction when I said to myself, oh my God, did I just see that James Gandolfini died? Huh? What? Well, anyway, fast forward several days, maybe a week or so later, lo and behold, on a different day, made the news that he had passed. Now, I remember once again going back into my web browsing archives. I searched high and low for the website where I know I saw that headline. There was nothing. I even remember telling my husband what I know I had just seen, but couldn't find the website where I thought I saw it. Now, equally bizarre, in someone in the same realm or way that the sissy thing happened, this thing was happening. Essentially, it's as if the technology foretold their deaths, even though they were in different ways and obviously slightly different circumstances. Now, for argument's sake, we could say that possibly the passings happened at the time that I saw the headline, and for whatever reason, it wasn't officially announced. That has happened. But I can tell you that James Gandolfini, as an example, I definitely recall reading the specific details of his death. If I'm not mistaken, I think he may have been traveling, and they had named the specific incident and the date that it happened. So I was able to juxtapose that date with the date that I knew I had seen. It wasn't the exact date because I couldn't find it, but I knew it was several days before. Bottom line is, there's something quite strange about both of these. Something quite strange about a lot of things going on in this regard. I'm going to give you one more super strange example, an experience that involved an email exchange that I was having with someone quite a few years ago. Now, I want to say probably at least 5 or 6 years ago. I'm going to tell it to the best of my recollection because it was, like I said, quite a while ago. But in any case, I had been emailing back and forth with someone who I think was recommended to me to be a guest on the show here. So we had been introduced through a mutual acquaintance, and we began this friendly email, as you do, back and forth to discuss the possibility of her coming onto the show. Well, on this particular occasion, I was in the middle of writing an email to her. It could have been a question I had about her work, her background, her career. Let's just say, I honestly can't remember exactly what I was writing in this email distinctly, but I do distinctly remember, get this, that as I'm writing the email to her, literally at the same time, I see an email from her come across to me answering my specific questions in the email that I was still crafting. Does that make sense? So essentially, she answered my question, specifically answering an email of mine that I hadn't even completed. I was literally in the middle of writing it. So this is what a clear example of what I would call a time distortion or maybe even a time overlap where there's this intersection of time, past, present, and future, just kind of overlapping, even if only by seconds or maybe just a minute or two, like in this case. You could argue that this could be an example of some form of telepathy, maybe. Did she, without realizing it, think she received the email I was still in the middle of writing and respond prior to my even sending it? I don't know. This is where it gets super wonky when you start to contemplate these sorts of things. But all of these incidents, to me, you guys, are deserving of an analysis that goes much deeper than just what some people call false recall or false memory, as some claim the Mandela effect is. I truly suspect there's something incredibly out of sync and out of our understanding of reality going on here, especially when we bring the idea of artificial intelligence in as a primary component to how we live our lives today. I just had a fantastic conversation offline with a super intense researcher in the consciousness and alternative space, a name you might know. His name is Frank Jacob. He's this brilliant, I'd call him brilliant independent filmmaker and director who's gone really deep into the research around and about, among other things, the influence of artificial intelligence and how it may be affecting the very fabric of reality, including our own behavior and our own perception. Now, he's gained quite a name for himself as a regular guest on another great podcast. Shout out to Inspired with Jean Nolan. He's actually been on our show. That's how I became familiar with his work, particularly on the subject of Project Looking Glass, which is a fascinating idea in and of itself, though disturbing. It really kind of delves into how timelines can be influenced and possibly changed entirely. So I spoke with him to get his thoughts on how some of the strange incidents I've personally witnessed might be explained or supported by an AI influence hypothesis. I'm going to touch on some of them right now, but I also want to let you know, so excited that Frank is going to be joining me as my guest for next week's show, where we're going to be going super deep, y'all, on these subjects, including AI as it relates to even transhumanism. So stay tuned for that. However, the theory, let's get into that. What might we be dealing with? Now stay with me on this because I know it can get a little bit confusing. Certainly it was for me as I kind of parsed through all of this. I just want to throw out a few concepts to you, have you chew on it as they came up in our conversation. Now, the first one that he mentioned has to do with this idea of sentient world simulation. Have you ever heard of that? Now, when we hear of the term by itself simulation, this idea that we may be living in some sort of a matrix like reality, we have these ideas as to what this may look like or what it is, right? The simulated model on its face, simulation theory, is actually becoming more readily discussed among some people in mainstream science. I don't know if you remember, there was this landmark event back in 2016. It was a panel discussion and a debate, the Isaac Asimov Memorial Debate that was held in New York City. I think it was at the American Museum of Natural History. The subject was, is the universe a simulation? Question mark. Is the universe a simulation? And there were these, high level academic panelists from different fields, including cosmology, philosophy, physics, computer science, and they all discussed this possibility that reality as we know it might be an artificial simulation created by an advanced civilization. Now, they went all out on this. The event was hosted by, I'm going to call him the notorious Neil deGrasse Tyson. I say that somewhat lovingly. We know how he can be sometimes with his sort of intense skepticism and also these extreme postulates on depending on what we're talking about. But I digress. Tyson himself he actually entertained the idea of a simulation as possible. And some of the panelists debated the scientific, the philosophical, and even the ethical implications of this hypothesis. Of course, why wouldn't they? But others were skeptical, which I'm not surprised, arguing there's no compelling evidence to support the idea. Now, David Chalmers, I believe his name is, who I think he's a physicist, was on the panel. He said that it's difficult to disprove. So it was good, a healthy debate on a radical idea, right? But the bottom line is the fact that this gathering of academic heads, I'm going to call them, having this kind of conversation spoke volumes to me as to how this sort of theory is gaining steam in these circles. So what does that imply? What did this, just the very fact that this talk take place back in 2016, what did that imply? I'm sure, as with some of you, maybe many of you, you might call this a form of predictive programming. By the way, I brought that up just a week ago in my interview with Rob and Trish McGregor. Not to push that, but it's something that has come to mind as I thought about what extra significance it might have had to have something like, maybe not. I clearly don't think this event was necessarily that well publicized in mainstream to mainstream audience on the evening news as an example, but it was out there. And what's put out there, I think, on any level could have an influence, even unconsciously, on how the masses receive, otherwise unbelievable information, right? However, and this is just a thought, but let's take this idea of the sentient world simulation a bit further. I had never heard that specific term. It's also referred to as SWS, because the real world implications of such a thing are huge. Believe it or not, I was able to gather some insight and intelligence. I'm laughing because of where I got it from none other than ChatGPT. Yes, I used it again. Admittedly, I've been using it a good bit lately while, inquiring about certain subjects in my course of research. Anyway, somewhat to my surprise, here's what it came back with. I'm actually going to read this to you word for word. When I asked essentially, what is sentient world simulation? I wanted to see what it was going to say. This is what it said. The Sentient World Simulation, or SWS, is a sophisticated virtual simulation system reportedly developed by the US military and defense agencies to model and predict human behavior on a healthy scale. Essentially, SWS creates a synthetic mirror of the real world, including populations, economies, political dynamics, social structures, and environmental factors, with the goal of simulating complex scenarios to anticipate how populations or individuals might react under various conditions, such as political upheavals, pandemics, natural disasters, or military interventions. The system uses real time data inputs such as news reports, social media activity, economic data, even military intelligence to continuously update its model of the world. Each sentient entity in the simulation corresponds to an individual or group in the real world, and the simulation runs through potential future outcomes based on various interventions or changes in conditions. SWS is part of the broader field of predictive analytics and is used for strategic planning, national security, and crisis management. Its existence raises questions about privacy, surveillance, and the ethical implications of simulating, potentially manipulating human behavior. Let me say that again, potentially manipulating human behavior. Now, look, that in and of itself is concerning to say the least, right? But I wanted to see how we might take something like SWS, we'll call it, and directly or even indirectly apply it to what I've explained here with the scenarios I shared earlier and the possible application of AI, which clearly SWS is built upon, and how that might influence our perception of time. I know that's a stretch, but I'm going to try to go there. We're going to try to, as we say, connect some dots. Remember, a couple of things happened with me as it relates to this, we'll call it the Sissy Houston scenario, right? Number one, I serendipitously stumbled upon this AI generated animation of Sissy and Whitney as part of a theme of notable African American public figures who passed away about a week before Sissy actually passed away. Now, once she did, I feverishly searched my own web browsing history to see the date I had inquired about the possibility that she had passed away, and it was nowhere to be found. So, what happened here? Did I simply overlook the search inquiry when I went into my web browsing history? Mind you, I did it like 3 or 4 times on every device I have. It could have been my Mac, it could have been, my smartphone, or I couldn't find anything. Or did I imagine that I saw this IG post depiction of Sissy with Whitney before Sissy died? No, I didn't. I know what I saw. How might we apply the technology that I just described, known as SWS, to this situation? Where I don't think there's a straightforward application that would directly tie SWS to what I experience. I do think that tinkering, this is important, when you tinker with such sophisticated AI, and obviously with SWS it is, um, AI models to do things like create a synthetic mirror to the real world, quote, that may actually be instigating or unleashing a capability that would also create almost, think of it like a portal like environment where our own time space continuum is literally bent, it's turned inside out. Now, obviously, we know about the Mandela effect, right? Though it has its detractors, not only do the stories of Mandela like effects persist no matter what the detractors say in so many people's minds, it persists in recent history accounts. Obviously, we know Cynthia Sue Larson, my buddy, is all over this. And as a matter of fact, I want to give a shout out to the International Mandela Effect Conference, which will be taking place next month, I believe, in Nashville. Nonetheless, in the case of the Mandela effect, insofar as something like, as an example, looking glass technology, it's making these very bizarre time slash event mishaps very plausible. We're not talking about false memory, like I said, as it's described. We're possibly talking about the messing, if I can say colloquially, with the very linear nature of reality. As Frank Jacob in our conversation told me the other day, he said something like, the evidence is out there that there's something taking place to warp our perception of a normal organic linear timeline, which is an artificial, of an artificial nature. Now, some would argue that a linear timeline even is anything but organic, right? That the perception of time moving in a straight line is in and of itself a construct. A lot of people have argued that. But either way, something is managing to warp our perception, my perception, your perception. Something is actually changing, or so it seems. Writings in books, logos, labels, storylines in movies, and even game boards. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about? The very physical nature of our reality, and I love to quote the Holographic Universe's author, Michael Talbot, as he said numerous times, the very nature of reality is plastic, it's malleable. And because of this plastic nature of reality to begin with, AI and systems designed to utilize AI's capabilities to the fullest extent can and are taking advantage of the nimbleness of reality. But we're the ones left holding the plastic bag, right? We're the ones left holding the bag because we're the ones that are in the dark as to what's really going on. Now, there were a few other areas that Frank and I spoke about during our call, and I'm so excited to have him on the show next week because he will obviously elaborate on all of these areas we're touching on. But some of the things that we talked about, in addition, on our offline phone call, were this idea of parallel versions of Earth. Of course, you could connect this with SWS technology. What are they doing? Creating a synthetic mirror of the real world? I don't know. I mean, you could say a mirror, and this is a little bit of a stretch, but you could say that a mirror could be likened in some cases to, uh, how would I explain this? A mirror could be likened to a parallel to something else, right? Like a mirror reflects the physical appearance of objects and people in real time. Let's go back to SWS. This technology is designed to reflect the behaviors, the interactions, and the dynamics of the real world in a simulated environment. There are so many plausible connections here. So many. Quickly, I want to give you a few other areas Frank and I will be discussing next week that we talked about offline. I said to him during our call, we should have just pressed record because it was a pretty heavy conversation. But staying on this theme of AI and real world implications, of course, what we call the digital matrix came up, feedback loops and the real-time rewriting of reality. This, of course, ties, I think, directly into the Mandela effect theory. But I'm also going to ask him to talk about D-wave quantum computer, the D-wave quantum computer. Have you heard of that? I'm only familiar with it on a cursory level, but he had some interesting things to say about one of the key inventors. There were several inventors of the D-wave. His name is, if I'm pronouncing it right, I think it's Geordie Rose. Now, apparently, he made some very interesting comments about comparing D-wave quantum computer, at least tangentially, as it relates to, guess what? The Mandela Effect. So I know Frank's going to have a lot to say about that. I also, leaving Frank and moving on to my friend, I want to shout out to Susan Manowich, who I love dearly. I had a brief conversation with her as I was doing research for this little commentary about the weirdness of our experience of time these days, including and similar to the stories I shared with you about Sissy Houston and Gandolfini, et cetera. And also the super bizarre email overlap incident. I will never forget when that happened. But I wanted to get Susan's thoughts on what she thought might be going on. And I'll tell you essentially what she said. It was very interesting. She said something like, our brains are not used to seeing AI do what it does. And when it does it, it's happening so much faster. It's instantaneous, right? And that in and of itself may be altering our perception of how we experience not only time, but the events themselves. It's almost like the AI, with all of its speed, is scrambling our brains and how we decipher things, if that makes sense. Now, of course, I think it's a heck of a lot more complex than I'm explaining right now, and likely a heck of a lot more sinister. But either way, we're being messed with big time. Well, I want to end with a quote that I found. I thought this was so apropos from the late, great, I'm going to call him great because I loved his work, Terence McKenna. Now, if you know his work, he was very candid, but very articulate with these proclamations of his, you know, that much of what he had to share was deep and beyond deep. And I would say way ahead of his time. So here's what he said. And I think this fits perfectly with what we're seeing and experiencing right now. I'm going to read this to you. He says, I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder. And finally, it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Because eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's just too nuts. It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. So I look for the invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, possible human immortality, and at the same time, appalling acts of brutality, genocide, race baiting, famine, starvation, because the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed. End quote. Weirder and weirder and weirder indeed. As always, I want you to weigh in. Let me know what you're thinking on all the stuff we talked about today. Most importantly, I want to know, what are you experiencing, guys? We've done shows on a number of occasions, kind of touching on this idea of the wonkiness as it may relate to technology and more specifically to artificial intelligence. And I have heard from some of you, but I want to hear particularly now, is something happening in the same regard? Tell me your stories of time and space. Are they playing tricks on you, or is AI playing tricks on you? Let me know in the comments below. And then, of course, be sure to join me next week, along with my first time guest, Frank Jacob, as we will go, I promise you, very deep into this labyrinth of AI as well as transhumanism. Frank's perspective is super fresh and intelligent, and some of his ideas are indeed far reaching. Yes, even for us in the alternative and independent media. But I think you'll find a lot of what he has to say refreshing and certainly thought provoking. So I'll meet you back here next week, okay? Oh, and by the way, don't forget to push up that like button. Also, the notification screen so you can find out about Frank coming up and other shows down the road. And yes, a subscribe is always appreciated. Well, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you soon. Take care.